It's time for Security Now. Steve Gibson is here. Coming up, we're going to talk about a hack to Fortnite cheaters. Couldn't happen to a nicer bunch. Also, why your browser might be freezing. More privacy leakage from a fitness app. And at the end, Steve's going to talk about a new proposal to keep email secure. Actually, it's an old proposal that might be getting new life. It's all coming up next on Security Now.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Security Now is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com. This is Security Now with Steve Gibson, episode 671, recorded Tuesday, July 10th, 2018. Start TLS Everywhere. Security Now is brought to you by Thinkst Canary. Detect attackers or malicious insiders on your network with honeypots that can be deployed in minutes. For 10% off and a 60-day money-back guarantee, go to canary.tools/twit and use the code TWIT in the How Did You Hear About Us box. And by Moogsoft. Reduce IT alerts and tickets by up to 90%. Guaranteed. Visit moogsoft.com to learn more and sign up for a demo. And by Rocket Mortgage by Quicken Loans, introducing Rate Shield Approval. If you're in the market to buy a home, Rate Shield Approval locks up your rate for up to 90 days while you shop. It's a real game changer. Learn more and get started at rocketmortgage.com/security now. It's time for Security Now, the show where we cover your security and privacy, explain it all in depth, thanks to this guy right here, Steve Gibson of the GRC Corporation.
I love it how you turn around to look at me, Leo.
Well, you're right behind me. You're over my shoulder.
Right there.
And if I don't look around, I don't see your salute.
That's right. You got to have the Vulcan, whatever it is, salute.
The ancient Yiddish salute. Yeah.
So as we expected, when I added an extra T to start TTLS, and it's actually just start TLS for
you
those
could say
who
it's
were
star TTLS.
Or I could be stuttering. Start TLS.
There's a lot of T's in there.
I can't count them all. As expected, we have a lot of interesting, fun stuff, but nothing dramatic that pushed back my intention, as I mentioned last week, to talk about the latest EFF initiative, Start TLS Everywhere, which should remind us of HTTPS Everywhere. And there are a lot of overlaps and similarities, but of course some differences. This is the effort to push email encryption further towards, well, let's just say usefulness, because it isn't very right now. And this is not PGP or SMIME or, you encrypt it, then you send it. This is an attempt to shore up sort of this weird intermediate solution, which has actually kind of already been abandoned. But as with everything on the internet, if it kind of works, then it's really hard to kill. So rather than trying to kill it, they're trying to fix it. So we're going to talk about, we're going to end the podcast talking about that, sort of understand where we are with not additional encryption, which of course an end user can always decide they want to employ, which would give you true end-to-end protection. As a consequence of the way email works, this doesn't, even in the best of times, you don't get end-to-end encryption. Even using the latest solutions and systems, because email is a multi-point hop system, store and forward by design. And so essentially any servers along the way are man in the middles who get your unencrypted email, again, when everything is working perfectly. So this is why I've never been super excited about the prospects of encrypting email unless an individual goes to extremes. But anyway, we're going to wrap up with that. First, we're going to talk about another new and emerging worrisome trend in malware. Yet another fitness tracking mapping incident and mistake. Something to warn our friends and family to ignore if it happens to them. The value of periodically auditing previously granted web app permissions. And some malware that has actually become picky about which machines it infects and what it does depending upon what it finds. We have another kind of well-meaning coin hive service, which didn't take long to get abused. We're going to look at the implications of D-Link having lost control of its code signing cert, which did happen. Some good news about Android apps. We will talk, as you did on the previous podcast, Leo, about last night's iOS update to version 11.4.1, which, among other things, introduced something new that the user has control over, known as a USB restricted mode, and whether it actually is, or at least something to be aware of as a wrinkle in the way it works. We have a public service reminder about the need to wipe old thumb drives and memory cards. I mean, wipe them proactively before you let them out of your control, and what a team in the UK discovered when they just bought a bunch. Also, the picture of the week is just, I got a kick out of this, and our listeners will. It turns out that free USB-powered fans were handed out at the recent North Korea-U.S. summit, where our fearless leader met theirs. And, of course, it really upset the security mavens who were like, wait a minute, folks, those were made in China. Please don't plug them into your phones without, it's like, what could possibly go
the one
wrong?
that just happened, or the one with Trump earlier?
The one, it was the 14th.
Yeah,
it was the 14th.
Yeah,
yes.
Pompeo was out there talking to them last week. Okay.
Right.
So this is the.
This was the first one.
The first one. I could just I could see it. God, you can just see Donald Jr. picking this up, saying, "Oh, this is great. This is great. I just keep me cool in the summer."
Well, and it looks like it was nicely designed from the photo, which is our photo of the week. I used the caption: "Free Chinese-made USB fans handed out during the recent North Korea-U.S. political summit. What could possibly go wrong?"
So I'm guessing on the other side of that wire is a USB plug. You plug it in your laptop. It's got a little gooseneck so that you can aim the fan at you while you're sitting in front of your laptop.
Well, actually, to me, it looks like the fan module itself
I see
is a USB Type C.
Get it?
And then they have a little.
Well. Yeah.
Exactly.
So it's for your phone.
Exactly. And you would plug it, and the way it's tilted, you would plug it into the bottom of your phone where the power connector is, and that would give you a fan at the bottom of your phone facing your face. So it's like convenient. And you can imagine the security people were quite upset.
USB protected mode on this one.
You need a USB condom is what you need.
Well, do you, though? I mean, this is, I guess phones have data access, but there's not, I mean, what would they do with this? Could it infect a phone?
Yeah, it could have malware.
Yeah.
And that was the concern. Anyway, we will talk about all of that in the fullness of time, Leo, before we let our listeners go off about their normally scheduled lives. They are captive until then. So
we like to keep them captive. Our show today brought to you by a canary. Somebody in the chat room, Zephyr in the chat room, said, like a canary in a coal mine. That's exactly the name. That's exactly the reason for the name of the Thinkst canary. The folks at Thinkst, the guys at Thinkst, are great. I spent some time talking to them. Haroon and company. They were pen testers, hackers for hire. You'd bring them in and say, is our network safe? And one of the things they observed is how little companies know about network penetrations. And, you don't have to look farther than the headlines to see somebody like, Sony Pictures Entertainment. Their network was breached months before they discovered it, which meant that the bad guys had the free roam of the network, were downloading stuff checking out, assaying all the network assets to figure out what were the soft targets, where the good stuff was, and then they downloaded it, exfiltrated it over time, and then Sony discovered it. Target, Equifax, Yahoo, I can go on and on. In almost every case, these companies learn about the breach long after it happened. Thinks Canary is all about changing it. I got one right here. I don't know if you can see it. It's kind of off to the edge. I don't have quite a long enough cable, but you can see it's just a little box, little tiny thing, connects up to your network, but it can be almost anything. Oh, wait a minute. Let me log into my Thinkst dashboard. I think we have Houston, we have a problem. Alerts. So I've set up my Canary to look like a Synology NAS. It's even named Backup NAS. And I'll show you how you do that. It could be a lot of different things. We saw all these alerts a few weeks ago. And we were a little puzzled because it was coming from within the house. 47 incidents of attempting to log into my NAS from this IP address, which turns out to be down the hall next to Megan. We figured out what it is. She had hooked up. Promise makes a drive vault that you connect to your computer. This drive vault goes out and looks for other NASs on your network. A lot. Needless to say, we shut that down. So you see how valuable it is. This is our Canary. It's configured it has file transfer, a web server, NAS login, port scan monitor, Windows file share, and SSH. See, the neat thing about the Canaries, they don't just look vulnerable on your network. They look valuable. And I can configure my Canary to look like almost anything. I've got the name Backup NAS. I put this, Leo's Studio Desk, but you could put, Bank Vault. That'd be a good one. This one's in the Bank Vault. Yeah. Now I could choose the personality. There's quite a few. Look at this one. Bear Canary or Christmas tree. All services enabled. You love that one. Or you want to be more subtle. No services. We'll just, you could say it's a Windows file share, Windows 8 desktop file share, MS SharePoint 2010. I could say IIS is running here. I could say it's a Linux server, database, or proxy. I could say it's an OS 10 file share, a Dell switch, a Cisco router. I can go on. These are all, you can even say it's a Siemens SCADA device in case, you want to get the spooks involved here. You could choose your MAC address suffix. Of course, the prefix is determined by the manufacturer. So you can see my prefix is posing on the MAC address as Synology. The hacker's going to say, oh yeah, that's a Synology. I recognize it. Here's all the services you can turn on. It goes on and on and on. Once you've got it all configured, now it's just sitting on your network just waiting to be attacked. I love that. These guys have been in the security game for decades. They have trained companies and militaries and governments on how to break into networks. They've used that experience to build the Canary. Look at there also the Canary tokens, which I love. You can create files. Let's say this is a Microsoft Word doc. And we're going to say upload the document to the token. I'm going to choose a file name and create a new Canary token. That is a file that looks like a Microsoft Word document. I can even name it payroll. I can then, let's create that new token. And then I can then put it, spread it all around my network. Anybody ever hits that file for any reason, tries to open it, whatever, I'm going to get, you see I have one called payroll information. And I have one called test, which is probably a little less useful. In fact, you know what? Let's delete that because anything that says test QR Canary token is probably something you don't want to have on your network. The idea is you never use the word Canary. You never tell anybody this is on here. This looks exactly like a Excel spreadsheet containing or a PDF containing payroll information. But the minute somebody touches it, downloads it, opens it, I'll get an alert. System is very well priced. Instead of some big upfront cost for a bunch of servers and so forth, they license the Canaries annually. If anything happens to any one of your birds during the year, they'll just replace them. The pricing allows you to easily try a few, scale up as you need. Some small shops have just a Canary or two. There are banks, we won't name names because that's the whole point, that have hundreds of them. Although I have to say, the Slack CTO is one of the guys who said, you only need a couple of things to protect your network, and Canary is one of them. They're deployed all over the world. All seven continents. Biggest names in Silicon Valley run them. Love them. You will too. And here's the deal. For $7,500 a year, you get 5 canaries, your own hosted console, upgrades, support, and maintenance for a full year. Canary.tools/twit. Now, this is not for the home user. This is. I hope if you're listening to this and you're a CISO or a CIO, a CTO, this is something you're really going to want to look at for your network. We got a special offer, actually. If you use the code TWIT, in the box it says, how did you hear about us? 10% off the price. And not just for the first year, but for life. We are sure you'll love your things to Canary, but if you're not happy, you can always return your canaries. They have a really good money-back, two-month money-back guarantee. You have 60 days to get a full refund. So go ahead. There's no reason not to try this. Canary.tools/twit. Enter the code TWIT. It's actually a lot of fun setting these up. As you can see, I have a blast playing with my canaries. The tokens are free. They're part of the Canary hardware purchase. That token connects to the Canary device, so it's all within the network. It's not in any way suspicious, although we've mentioned before, Thinkst offers free Canary tokens, but it goes back to the Thinkst server. So somebody who's savvy is going to say, oh, I just saw that ping the Thinkst server, and is going to get off the network. That's why having your own token server is really nice. That's part of the deal, too, so you can spread those files all over the place. $7,500 a year for 5 canaries. Canary.tools, but you can get fewer or more. Canary.tools/twit, but you will get 10% off the price for life when you use the offer code TWIT in the How Did You Hear About Us box. I love talking about this product because it's such a clever idea and such a useful tool for the right person. On we go, Mr. Gibson.
So, I've heard you talk about Fortnite a lot.
Yes,
amazed
love it.
by the amount of money that those guys make for a game that they give away for free. Predictably, there would be add-ons, and we've seen this with all games which achieve, stardom and fame, which are cheats of various sorts.
It's a big problem with multiplayer online games because if you're playing against somebody who cheats against you, that really sucks.
Yeah. And it is, it's technology which is prone to manipulation.
Right.
So there's a service known as Rainway, which it's sort of similar to PlayStation Now. It's recently out of beta earlier this year. It's a video game streaming service that allows users to run games on their PC and play them on devices over an internet connection, play them on other devices over an internet connection. So sort of like remote desktop for gaming. Okay, last week, Rainway engineers some of whose customers were naturally playing Fortnite because it's so popular, began detecting infections in their users' systems when the Rainway server logs began reporting hundreds of thousands of errors. I think 308 or something thousand errors that they had logged in a short period of time. The errors were the result of ads that had somehow been injected into user traffic. Rainway uses whitelist filtering to permit its customers to connect only to approved URLs, so those connection attempts were being caught and blocked. And note that, like, for non-Rainway users, this wouldn't have happened. So it was just sort of a coincidence of the fact that some Fortnite users had downloaded a cheat whose behavior was being raising flags in the streaming service that they happened to be using for playing video games. So and that service had the foresight to whitelist specific URLs, blocking other ones, which then raised the flag. Otherwise, this would have, who knows how long it would have taken to catch this. So it turns out that the attempts that were caught were fraudulent content injected into the the sessions of these Rainway customers attempting to connect to two different ad platforms, adtelligent.com and springserve.com. And there was also unauthorized JavaScript that was bound to those ads, which again, this sort of like what the Rainway engineers were like, okay, what is going on here? So this strongly suggested to Rainway that something was going on. They examined Rainway examined the profiles of the affected users looking for common threads, because initially all they were seeing was just errors. They didn't know what their users were doing that was causing this trouble. They had no hardware in common. Their ISPs were different. All of their systems were up to date, but one thing stood out. All of them were playing Fortnite. So then, suspecting that some malware might have been spread by one of the many Fortnite cheating hacks available, the Rainway guys started downloading thousands of add-ons looking for something that might be causing this trouble, and they found it. They found an add-on which was promising in-game currency. I guess it was called V-Bucks, is the currency within that world, and also promising to equip users with an aim bot, which would automatically aim the player's gun at their opponents without any need for particular precision by the player. So and what they did was they scanned all of these different add-ons looking for the strings which they were seeing being emitted and captured in their logs. That's how they found this one. So they then ran the add-on in a virtual machine and discovered that, among other things, it installed a self-signed root certificate into the user's playing platform, into their PC. And of course, as we know, that would enable a man-in-the-middle attack on every HTTPS website the user visited. And in fact, as they continued to look at it more closely, they discovered that it was indeed intercepting. It was using this newly installed self-signed root cert to perform a man-in-the-middle attack on all of the web pages that the game players were visiting on the fly to insert the references to these two ad platforms. So they reported the rogue malware to the service provider who was hosting it, and that provider immediately removed the malware and let them know that it had been downloaded 78,000 times. So there are 78,000 instances of Fortnite players who, had downloaded a cheat and got themselves hacked as a process, and had a rogue had a rogue self-signed certificate stuck into their root certificate store in order to perform this, basically ad fraud with their system. And at the time of their reporting, Rainway reported 381,000 interceptions of blocked URL attempts in their own logs, and I'm sure only a tiny fraction of Fortnite's users happen to also be using the Rainway service. So the infection is probably massive. The Rainway guys also reported their discovery to the Adtelligent and SpringServe ad platforms, who identified and pulled the ads from their platform. And in Ars Technica's coverage of this, Dan Gooden reached out to Epic Games, who is the maker of Fortnite, but Epic declined to comment. So I'm beginning to see this behavior, and I wanted to sort of put it on our listeners' radar. But when I say this behavior, what I mean is instances of self-signed root certificates being stuck in people's root stores. So I wanted to make sure that everybody understood what that meant. A CA certificate that we often talk about, how there are now thousands of them that we trust. All of what those certificates are self-signed certificate. That is, it is a certificate that no higher authority vouches for. The authority is essentially vouching for itself. So it signs its own certificate so that the certificate has a valid signature, but the signature is valid only because the certificate is in the root store. So when Windows or whatever platform, Linux, iOS, all anything that is using root certificates, when the system checks the certificate, it finds it in its own root store because that's where the certificate is. So it's automatically trusted. But more importantly, the certificate is also the root of a chain of trust, meaning that any other certificates that come along are checked against the certificates in the root store to see whether they should be trusted. So when malware drops a self-signed certificate into the user's root certificate store, what's happening is like really bad. It's what you don't want, because we're, as we've talked about, we already sort of have a fragile public key infrastructure based on trusting anything that is signed by any of the certificates in our root store. And so this is where the CAs that have gotten in trouble, like famously Symantec did a couple of years ago, and essentially just lost their certificate signing business as a consequence. If their certificates can't be trusted, they get kicked out of the root store, and it's game over for them. So, as I said, I'm running across more instances of this, which is why my radar perked up when I saw that this is now the behavior we're seeing. Once upon a time, before all web traffic was encrypted, that is, when most web traffic was still HTTP, under the somewhat mistaken belief that adding security was too processor intensive, it would slow things down. That really wasn't, except in the very early days, that wasn't the case. It was just inertia. It was just everything seems to be running fine. Again, nothing seems wrong, except when we finally woke up to the fact that our session tokens were in plain text cookies. That allowed a passive eavesdropper to jump onto and impersonate a user simply by grabbing their cookie that was passing in the clear in any open Wi-Fi scenario, for example, and be logged on as them. So as we know, pretty much now, thanks to another EFF initiative, Let's Encrypt, but also just even before then, just a raising of the awareness of the importance of encryption, suddenly it was no longer feasible to alter web pages and inject content. So unfortunately, what this has done is it's put pressure on the system, which is trying to protect us, with the consequence being that malware is now routinely, maybe not yet routinely, but again, I think we're going to see this as an emerging trend, is saying, okay, fine. All of the software for creating a little HTTPS intercepting server is open source and in the public domain now. All we need to do in order to terminate the connection ourselves, just like a corporate middle box does, which we've often talked about, is drop a certificate into the user's machine, just like a corporate middle box does that wants to filter for antivirus and provide content filtering for the people being protected within the network. So we've talked in the past about auditing our certificate root stores. And in fact, I played with one for a while that dynamically looked to see what certificates were being used and raised a flag. I ended up having to abandon that particular tool because Google is, themselves a CA, and I'm a user of Google properties, and they were constantly churning their own certificates. They have every right to do so, but it was raising false positives all the time of certificates changing. And so I finally just said, okay, well, this isn't working as it is. But I think that what we're going to need to see, we're going to need to have our certificate stores hardened more than they are, because they shouldn't need to be changed often. I mean, I would argue that there's really not a good reason for the certificate store to be populated and managed by anything other than the official maintenance system of our OS vendor. So, for example, in the case of Windows, it should only be Windows Update that has the ability to mess with that. I think only due to, for again, historical reasons, is it something that is browsable and you can poke in and look at and decide if you want to mess with it. I was doing that myself just a couple weeks ago, needing a local host server on my system, and so in order to do some work. And it wasn't hard to just drop a self-signed local host cert into my machine in order for a server using it to be trusted. So, there are valid reasons, but you should have to jump through all kinds of hoops to do that. That should not be something that random malware that gets onto your system is able to do, because I think this is, as I said, this is the next thing we're going to see is more instances of this happening in the future. I think this is something we need to lock down, and so far that hasn't happened. In another piece of global fitness tracking mapping gone wrong, our listeners will recall that I think it was in 2016, we talked about the Strava fitness tracking app, which was just sort of publishing all of the positioning information of its users because everyone kind of thought that would be cool to look at maps of where people were using their app. Unfortunately, it turned out that there were people on secret military bases going out for a jog around camp who were being logged, and satellite looking maps had this Strava fitness tracking data overlaid on it, and suddenly there was sort of a lot of activity in areas of the desert where nothing was shown on the maps. And so anyway, we talked about it at the time. Well, it turns out that some investigations carried out by reporters from a Dutch newspaper, De Correspondent, and online investigations group Bellingcat have found another instance which caused Polar, the well-known, I think they're Dutch, aren't they?
I don't know.
No, not. I don't remember. Polar is Finnish. Finnish. Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So they have what they found has caused Polar to suspend its global activity mapping feature. It's kind of not Polar's fault, but well, anyway. So here's what happened: the two groups of reporters discovered that Polar Flow, which is one of Polar's apps, was allowing anyone access to a feature called Explore, which is Polar's activity map. The data exposed on this map included a user's past activity, running, biking routes, and so forth. but included the user's personal details, such as their heart rate, various fitness attributes, and more. Well, what Polar did was they made the mistake of exposing the username and personal details of each individual for each individual activity and route. And upon digging into it deeper, it looks like the user needs to explicitly allow that information to be shared, but they probably didn't understand fully the consequences. The reporters were able to, thanks to this disclosure, the real-world identities of specific intelligence and military personnel. The journalists used this feature to search the map for the location of known military bases and intelligence agencies' headquarters and training grounds. They were then able to identify the people who reported fitness activity history at those locations. And in several cases, the researchers were able to identify the usernames, which led back to real-world identities, either because the military and intelligence agents used their real names for the Polar app, or because they reused usernames that were associated with them elsewhere, and the reporters were able to make the connections. And also in some cases, the same routes which they ran while jogging on base also contained the jogging and biking routes in other locations for the same person, which then allowed that linkage, exposing what looked like their user's home address. So again, in response to these revelations, Polar immediately shut down the global activity mapping feature, but they then did seek to clarify that this Polar Flow app does not expose the user's activity and username by default. Polar said that these details are shared only based on an opt-in system, and the data exposed via its activity map had to be willingly shared only by, or had to be and was being shared only by some of its users, with the majority of their users' data remaining private. So I guess I would say that this is clearly a privacy concern, and anybody who is using this really needs to have it be made clear. I mean, there's some tension here, right? Polar, much like Strava, wants to brag about how many people are using their stuff. It's people all over the world. Look at how busy everybody is getting fit and healthy. The flip side is, I mean, it is an information disclosure. And so people, I think, who are saying, yes, I want to, others to be able to see my little red lines where I'm running and or my username and other data, I want to share that, really need to be made aware of the downside consequences from a privacy standpoint.
Yeah, I don't think you can blame Polar Flow for that. I mean, maybe it's good for Polar to show how many people use their app, but that's the point of it. Apple does the same thing with their activity rings. You can share it with other people, and then you compete with them, and so forth.
Do you share it with specific people in the Apple case, though?
Yeah,
because this was shared globally.
Yeah, but
this was a global.
There were two things that were wrong. I mean, clearly, if you're an NSA intelligence officer and you're publicly sharing your run route, you need to go back to school and learn some OPSEC stuff. That's right. But there seems to have also been a problem.
You were absent for that day of training when they said
what? I mean, it's actually not a surprise. There's a lot of military folks in great shape, and so they're exercising. So clearly they're at fault for making it public. The problem really also was there was an API that was exposing this, and they used sequential index numbers for customers, so you could just query the API and get this information, and that's clearly Polar's fault. That's
a poor design from an anonymizing standpoint. Yep.
But I mean, there's lots of apps that, Runkeeper does this too, where you share your run, and people like to do that, and they like to, so
Yeah.
they probably shouldn't be doing it if they're in a secret location.
Probably not if your location should not be disclosed.
Yeah, especially since this whole thing came up already, and
Yes, exactly. 2 years ago, it made the
out.
news, and it couldn't have been even any more specific.
It was a running program. It was exactly the same.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so Leo, on your Tech Guy show for Saturday and Sunday for 3 hours on the weekends, there's no question that people have called you asking what this is. And it uses an interesting hack, which I wanted to talk about, and just sort of put it on our listeners' radar. I doubt that any of our listeners would get caught out by this, but probably they have friends and family who might. So it turns out that freezing someone's browser is a thing. And it's
that's interesting.
Yeah.
because we do get calls about that. Yeah.
Yes. It is a deliberate tactic on the part of bad guys to sell an assertion they're making, which users might otherwise just kind of blow off. It's that your computer has been infected with malware. We're Microsoft, and so we have locked your computer. Please call this toll-free number, and it's 1-888 something or other, in order to talk to one of our technical support people so that we can help you disinfect your machine and get you going again. And so, if it just came up on a web page, given all the nonsense people encounter on the net, people would be inclined to go, what? And just close the page. But what is being done is the browser is locked completely. The UI is frozen, which plays into the warning that is being presented and helps to sell it to people who would otherwise think, this just seems like a scam. So, back in February, Malwarebytes first described a scam using a particular Windows web. I'm sorry, just not web or not Windows. A particular cross-browser web API, which is window.navigator.ms save or open blob, which is cross-browser supported. It's the means for a browser to save, as it sounds, a blob of just sort of opaque data for its own purpose on the user's machine. So it provides locally storing and retrieving these blob files. But it's an asynchronous operation. That is to say, the call is made to save or open the blob, well, in the case of save, and the JavaScript goes on, assuming that that's going to be done. So this allows JavaScript to do whatever it wants to do while this save is occurring in the background. Well, that also allows this call to be placed into a tight loop, with the blob save requests quickly becoming backlogged in the browser, with the OS unable to do the work of creating lots of little files quickly enough. This pins the system's CPU at 100%, and within a few seconds completely shuts down the browser's UI. You can't close the tab. You can't even click the close button on the browser. You can't get out. The whole browser is locked. So and the not only does the browser become responsive, but in some cases the system does too. So of course people get freaked out by this. So Chrome version 65 in February fixed the problem, and then it came back in Chrome 67 and is today once again being actively exploited. And it's not just Chrome. The Microsoft browsers, both Edge and IE, are not affected by this. I'm just guessing. I haven't looked, but they probably just don't bother to support this web API. They generally are lagging a little bit behind, or maybe they just do it correctly. But Firefox and other non-Microsoft browsers, including Opera, Vivaldi, and Brave, are all caught out by this. And I didn't see any mention of Safari one way or the other, so I'm not sure over on the app on the iOS platform or the
I'm thinking because it
Mac OS
says
platform.
MS Blob, it might be Microsoft specific.
Except that it's Chrome, Firefox, Opera, Vivaldi, and Brave.
Yeah,
so I'm not
but
sure
it might have to be on Windows, I'm saying.
Okay, that's a possibility. Yeah.
Because I don't know what MS Blob would do on a Macintosh.
Anyway, so this behavior has returned, and lots of people are reporting that their browsers are freezing with this notice. So first of all, I'm sure our listeners know that in Windows, Control-Alt-Delete will bring up a menu. Among the items there is Task Manager, and you can then use Task Manager to terminate the visible processes under your browser name. That you'll see a bunch of Firefox.exes, a bunch of Chrome.exes, or whatever. And under macOS, there's a force quit that macOS gives you in order to just kill the browser in order to get this thing to stop. So I just wanted to sort of put it on our listeners' radar. Again, I'm sure that our listeners would look at this and go, okay, something has deliberately hung this page and the browser, but apparently this is a lucrative scheme and it is being exploited whenever it can. And there's a history of this. Even before this particular API, the Cretans have figured out how to lock up a browser after presenting this scary message in order to get people to call. And what happens is the hopefully or I guess not hopefully, but the convincing sounding tech support person talks the person out of their credit card information in order to pay for the technical support required to fix this. And as we know, none of this is Microsoft behavior. So again, this is not the way Microsoft works.
I'll have a new answer for people who call. I mean, of course, when people call saying I got this, notice that I should call Windows about my bug, I usually tell them don't. But I didn't realize that they could freeze the browser. That's cool. I mean, that's not cool.
Now, not cool, but
not
interesting.
Cool, but cool.
Yes, yes. So I just sort of also wanted to put out a reminder that it's worth auditing your app permissions from time to time. We've talked about this over on the Android platform, but there was a piece in the Wall Street Journal suggesting that although Google had said they had stopped rifling through people's email for the sake of choosing ads and any kind of targeting, it's not the case if you have given apps permissions on your email. There's a place you can go, myaccount.google.com/permissions. And I went there because I was curious. It turned out that my favorite PDF reader for iOS, iAnnotate, has access to my Google Drive, and I want it to. There were a bunch of things which were able to use Google for authentication, so log in with Google. Then Chrome itself had full access to my Google account, and YouTube TV, which I've started to experiment with, has access to YouTube. But otherwise, I didn't have any things that looked worrisome. However, the Hacker News covered this Wall Street Journal article and noted that, for example, an app like SaneBox, which is a third-party manager of Google Mail inbox, of a user's Google Mail inbox, would, as you'd expect, have full access to it.
So you have to tell somebody that?
I know. Although the point is that many times you may have used something for a week or two and then decided, I really don't care about this anymore.
Right.
So it's worth just going through and making sure there's no stale permissions that you're giving apps that no longer need them.
Anytime I read an anti-Google article in the Wall Street Journal, I always have to judge whether it's a hit piece, which I think I judge this to be, because there's the kind of a hereditary animosity between the journal and Google, because of course Google's stealing all their advertising. So you got to read it with a grain of salt. Yeah. Basically, the point of the article is if you give applications access to your Gmail, they can read your Gmail. Well, duh.
Well, it's also, though, that if you stop using applications,
you should turn it off. Yes.
Yes. Apps don't remove their own permissions.
Right.
So it tends to be a cumulative thing, and from time to time, just going through and you might well find, I forgot that I had given that thing that I'm no longer using full access to my email.
It's a little like Louis in Casablanca, though. I'm shocked to learn that applications are reading my email. Of course they are. And then they had to kind of say, and by the way, it's not just computers. Sometimes it's humans, because during the machine learning process, humans are used to train programs. Let me tell you another thing you could be shocked by. If you have an anti-spam filter, if any of your web-based emails have spam filtering, which all do, they're also reading your email. There's no other way to filter spam.
Yep.
So, I mean, I don't know. I feel like the Wall Street Journal this was link bait.
Yeah. Still.
Yeah. I mean, it's worth absolutely noting, and certainly we should note, that you should go through those permissions all the time, not just for mail, but everything else, to see what else. And on Twitter and on everything else, Facebook, that you give permissions to, because you want to make sure that those people still deserve it.
Yep.
It's like saying, I am Barry says, it's like saying Windows reads the contents of your hard drive. I'm shocked.
No, it's not, but okay.
Well, it's kind of like that. These are all apps that you specifically signed up for, like TripIt or Unroll Me, to process your Gmail and tell you something. Well, there's no other way to do it. I think they're pretty clear when they say that we're going to look at your email. It's not like a human's doing it. All right. Yes, let's take a break. Our show today brought to you by, as often is the case, by the folks at MoogSoft. You've heard me talk about MoogSoft. If you're an IT professional, you know that one of the worst things that can happen in IT is that Christmas tree of alerts that go off, the tickets and alerts that go off. When one thing goes wrong, everything else seems to complain. And your problem is you've got to dig through all of those secondary caused alerts to find the root cause and fix it. Well, MoogSoft will help you reduce IT alerts and tickets by up to 90% and help you do exactly the thing you need to do to fix it. You don't need more stress. You need MoogSoft AI Ops, artificial intelligence for IT operations. It's really kind of cool how they've used machine learning to look at all these alerts to start to figure out that, when you get this alert, and this alert, it usually means that this failed. And sometimes it's something as stupid as, the date is misconfigured on your server, and that's why all the certs have stopped working, because they've all expired, because your server thinks it's in 1908. You want to fix the date. You don't want to worry about the other stuff. The nice thing about MoogSoft AI Ops is it figures that out, surfaces the actionable work items, clusters all the events into situations. You don't have to look at another alert or event ticket again. You look at the situation and you solve it. Now, here's the key, and I think sometimes people hear me talk about this and say, well, I don't want it to take over my job. No, that's not the point at all. It makes MoogSoft AI Ops was created by IT professionals for IT professionals to make you better at your job. They've got your back. They're here to make you a support hero, not to replace you. It's there. You don't have, and by the way, it's easy. You don't have to create rules or filters or models. It does it for you. That's the AI. That's awesome. And it works with all your existing tools. It learns what are correlated, what events are correlated, and starts to package those up into situations. It'll lower the frequency and duration of repeat incidents so you can get back to what you're doing best. We always mention this case study from HCL Technologies because this is a perfect example. They're a global IT managed service provider. If you're a managed service provider, you're responsible for a lot of people's servers and backups and all that stuff. And that means you get even more alerts, right? They use Moogsoft AI Ops as the event management layer within their award-winning Dry Ice platform. And that lets them and their clients streamline operational workflows, reduce time in the detect to correct life cycle of incident tickets, 33% reduction in mean time to restore. That lets them support more customers with service quality and keep operational costs low and efficiency high. You could do the same thing for yourself with Moogsoft AI Ops. Reduce your IT alerts and tickets by up to 90%, guaranteed. It'll make you better at your job. That's a great use of machine learning. Moogsoft.com. That's where you go to get a demo. Moog, M-O-O-G, like the synthesizer, soft.com. Why, you may say, is there a cow in the logo? Well, cows moo. And moo.com was not available. So they got Moogsoft.com. Moogsoft.com. Get a demo. You'll definitely appreciate how it changes your life. Back to you, Steve.
So we now have malware becoming a little picky about what it chooses to do when it gets into a person's computer. Kaspersky Labs discovered a new variant of the Rachni, R-A-K-H-N-I ransomware, although it's more than ransomware, which has been upgraded to include cryptocurrency mining also. But the malware faces a dilemma. Since mining cryptocurrency and encrypting all of the computer's valuable files tend to be mutually exclusive. It can't do both. So what's a malicious infection to do? Well, it literally checks out the system that it's in. It first performs some anti-virtual machine and anti-sandbox checks to decide whether it should infect the system at all without being caught. If it doesn't want to be analyzed, so it checks to see if it's running in a virtual environment to the best of its ability. If it looks like the coast is clear, it looks for a Bitcoin folder in the app data section of the user's machine, which suggests to it that the system's owner may have something to lose from encryption. So it installs ransomware to essentially encrypt the user's wallet along with everything else. It terminates all other running processes that might have files locked or that might stop it, then proceeds to encrypt the user's files and displays a ransom note in a text file. But if a Bitcoin folder doesn't exist and the machine is a bit beefier with more than 2 logical processors, which would mean more than a single hyper-threaded core, it decides that it's worthwhile to do some mining. So instead, it installs a cryptocurrency mining and gets to work doing that. And the cryptocurrency miner is something called MinerGate, which is a service that simultaneously mines Monero Original, and Dashcoin. MinerGate describes itself as a mining pool created by a group of crypto coin enthusiasts. They said it's the first pool which provides service for merged mining. This means that while mining on our pool, you can mine different coins simultaneously without decreasing the hash rate of for major coins. Anyway, so while that's all happening, and this is again further indication of the trend that I was noticing. It uses the Windows Cert Manager utility to install a root certificate, actually 2 certificates, one which claims to have been issued by Microsoft and the other by Adobe, in an attempt to disguise the miner as a trusted process. So it pretends to have been signed by Microsoft and that it's able to carry that spoof off, by sticking a certificate in, which is not actually a Microsoft certificate, but which does sign that piece of malware. So a user who is somewhat sophisticated would check the signature on the malware and say, oh, it's valid. This says the signature is valid and it's signed by Microsoft. Okay, if neither of those two conditions are met, that is, there's no Bitcoin wallet, which would suggest that encrypting the drive would be beneficial to it, or if it's on a rather weak machine, it switches into worm mode and begins to scour the network for any attached machines where it's able to gain access and install copies of itself there. So anyway, here's another instance of certificates being installed in machines by malware, something I hope we're going to see our OSs become hardened to soon, and sort of the logical evolution of malware since it's now easy to do cryptocurrency mining and it's also possible to do ransomware. Well, what's the best strategy? So it decides on the fly rather than only being a one-trick pony. We've talked about CoinHive a lot. That's the service which sort of in the gray zone. They ostensibly offer a service, as we've discussed, where a website can decide that it wants to monetize its visitors' visits by forwarding CoinHive mining to people who visit that site to run a miner on their system. And after that caused a big ruckus, then CoinHive took the initiative of making sure that the user had given permission to mine on their system while they were visiting the site, to keep bad guys from injecting CoinHive mining into other websites in order to mine maliciously, or at least in the background. Okay, so the CoinHive guys are nothing if not innovative. Now they've created a link shortener service which incorporates proof of work. So you were just talking about a link shortener that you're enamored of, Leo, in MacBreak Weekly. Our listeners know that I like Bitly, and I sometimes will use a Bitly link tied to something short just so our listeners can get to a long and confusing link easily. It's convenient. They're, of course, also a bit of a security concern because you can't see the link that you're going to without jumping through a little more hoops. So it can be used by bad guys to obfuscate a URL that you might not otherwise deliberately go to. Instead, you click the link and it uses a browser redirect to take you to where you're really going. So the CoinHive guys said, okay, let's use browser mining to monetize link shorteners, or our link shortener. CoinHive states on their page where they're selling this service, quote, if you have a URL you'd like to forward your users to, you can create and then they have the domain cnhv.co short link to it. The user has to solve a number of hashes which are adjustable by you and is then automatically forwarded to the target URL after they've done so. So, okay, seems kind of hokey, but it's, if it would allow the monetization of link forwarding. Unfortunately, it didn't take bad guys long, much as they abused the previous offering, to figure out a way to abuse this one. Luke Leal of Securi blogged about this a couple months ago, and it's just come back onto people's radar because it's now becoming quite prevalent. There are hundreds of sites which are now generally on various types of content management based. So they're using some sort of hacks to plant these links. There is an obscured script which is being embedded on sites, which when turned back into text that is deobfuscated, will render an iframe which contains a 1-by-1 pixel window. I saw some pictures of it. You could easily, you have to look for it in order to find it. It's in the upper left-hand corner, a 1-pixel iframe, and so it's of course doing the same thing. It's being planted on people's on websites' delivery pages. People are, as a consequence, having their computer, after running through this link redirect, essentially back on CoinHive.com, running Bitcoin miners on behalf of these of the people who planted the links on other websites. So once again, the CoinHive people, again, they're being innovative, but it turns out that when Luke posted his piece, no AV engines, as reported by VirusTotal, were objecting to this little URL that's being planted. I checked last night, and 9 of 67 different AV tools were listing it as dangerous. So I expect that more will be following. And in fact, I just clicked on it now to see if how quickly this is going up. And VirusTotal says, nope, still 9 out of 67. Remember that as we talked about VirusTotal last week as something you could upload malware to, you can also give it suspicious URLs and see whether there's anything that anybody objects to. So what's going to happen is that the AV tools will block this, and web browsers just are overall, I guess right now we probably have bit mining blocking for users who have deliberately installed them in web browsers. I presume a lot of our listeners have, because we've been talking about this and this has been a thing now for months. But there are certainly lots of people who don't yet have their browsers blocking, and the browsers, through the addition of an add-on, and browsers are not yet doing so natively. We need to have that happen, and then this whole annoyance will go away.
This site was not a URL. You'd actually, if you don't mind, a little sidebar, be interested.
Yeah, please.
It's itty.bitty.site. But it's not a URL.
Your site,
the one I was talking about.
Like. Yeah.
Because what it does is base 64 encodes whatever you put on the site into the URL. So the URL, which is long as a result, would work offline. Your browser renders it. So it allows you to do about a page of text. You could even do, if you look on the ittybitty.site website, you could even, and this is the potential risk, same risk as with any, site, because you could put a script in it. You could actually do an app in this thing. Here's a little calculator that's
very cool,
completely encoded in the URL, which is amazing. You can even generate. In fact, I'll show you this one. If anybody trusts me, this is a Jabberwocky. I could do the QR code for Jabberwocky, and if you saw if you scanned the QR code, it would actually show
take your browser to that location. Yep.
Yeah, without being online. So if you scan this with your phone, you'll get a page that has the Jabberwocky in it, but without being online, because it's entirely encoded base 64 into the URL, which is wild.
Very cool.
Yeah, and of course potentially hugely dangerous. But I would never mention that to anybody, unless they knew that.
If they compress the ASCII.
They do. They use Lempel Ziv.
Okay. Yep. That's what I was. That's exactly what I would do. I would compress it and then base 64 encode the binary.
Exactly
result.
what they do.
Nice.
You are so smart. It's kind of a neat hack, really.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
it really is. So we all know D-Link. They're one of the major, consumer router and little switch providers. I've got D-Link stuff around. Unfortunately, as can happen, but really should not happen, they lost control of their own code signing certificate, which is really bad. Security researchers from ESET recently identified 2 malware families that were previously associated with the cyber espionage group Black Tech, that malware had been or has been signed using valid digital certificates belonging to D-Link and another reputable Taiwanese manufacturer known as Changing Information Technology, not as well known to us in the U.S., but presumably in Taiwan. The first malware, named Plead, is a remotely controlled backdoor designed to steal confidential documents and to spy on users. The second piece of malware is a password stealer designed to collect saved passwords from users' browsers, Chrome, IE, Microsoft Outlook, and Firefox. So also, apps in addition to browsers. So the research notified D-Link and Changing Information Technology, both of these companies, about the issue, and the companies immediately revoked the compromised digital certificates on the 3rd and 4th, so last Tuesday and Wednesday of last week. However, unfortunately, as we know, certificate revocation relies upon the entity trusting the certificate's identity assertion to deliberately and continuously check with, or at least the first time it's encountered for that particular use, to check with a certificate's issuer and signer, that is the CA that issued the certificate, to re-verify the certificate's present real-time validity. Certainly lots of D-Link routers have firmware previously and legitimately signed with their cert. So if the router, as I would hope it would check that the firmware has been signed by D-Link, it would be nice if it also checked for revocation. But almost nobody actually does that in practice. It takes time, and it's not something that is often enough done. And it turns out that indeed most antivirus software does not bother to check the certificate's validity. The fact that it is a valid certificate signed by somebody in the root store and we are still within the validity dates, or, and this is interesting about certificates which sign code, those certificates contain a co-signature that is countersigned with a timestamp, which is obtained at the time of the signing. So, and that's important because, as we know, certificates themselves have a multi-year life, but like only 3 or 4 or 5 years. I think code signing certs have a longer life, but not forever. But the code could live on a repository somewhere. So the code itself could be signed with a certificate which has since expired, yet it was valid at the time of signing. So in order to know that the certificate wasn't signed with an expired certificate, the act of signing can bind a timestamp into the certificate, which cannot be spoofed because it comes from a signing authority, a timestamping service. So that's bound in. Okay, so what this means is that the certificate's been revoked, and we need to continue honor signings by that code signing certificate, which were signed as indicated by the timestamp previous to the revocation time. Now, the black tech hackers were using a non-revoked certificate to sign their certificates. So as long as they did that prior to and got them timestamped, as they presumably did, revocation after that fact would not invalidate the certificate. So this is a mess. The D-Link certificate in question was issued by Symantec on September 29th, 2016. So not quite 2 years ago. And the certificate is valid for more than a year from now. That is until September 30th, 2019. So this particular certificate had a 3-year life. After this date, that is after the certificate's actual expiration date, new signings under the certificate will be no longer valid. That is, the certificate itself would be invalid, independent of revocation checks. But until then, that is until a year from now, more than a year from now, any new malware that is signed by this certificate, unless the AV checks revocation of all certificates, is going to be deemed valid. So again, as I said, this is a mess. What will probably have to happen is that this particular certificate's thumbprint will be kind of reverse pinned. It'll be blacklisted by thumbprint, which cannot be spoofed, as we know, in responsible AV vendors, and maybe even hopefully in operating systems, will no longer trust things that have been signed after the date that D-Link says they know that the cert escaped their control, and if any software has been signed with that thumbprint. So it's a mess when code signing certs escape, because even when the system, I mean, first of all, the system is not working as well as it should, because that would say revocation would always be checked. In practice, that doesn't happen. So the best we can do, in terms of practical use of the system, is for notification to happen, and for operating systems and antivirus vendors, maybe, who are able to respond more quickly. I mean, they're desperate. AV vendors are, to continue demonstrating that they're adding value as operating systems continue to take on more responsibility for protecting users, natively. So, not good when this happens, and especially from a major company like D-Link. I'm sure they're not happy that the cert got away from them. Okay. iOS version 11.4.1. This happened just last night. I updated a couple of my iDevices today so that I could see this and experience this for myself. There was a feature which first appeared in the iOS 12 beta, and it wasn't clear whether Apple would hold the feature back for iOS 12. We learned officially last night that they decided not to. There's now a switch which has been added to the Face ID or Touch ID and passcode section of the Settings app, which allows for the essentially USB access to the phone to be disabled when the phone is locked. So that's a cool new feature. The caption under the feature explains that you can unlock the iPhone. Explains unlock iPhone to allow USB accessories to connect when it's been more than an hour since your iPhone was locked. So what happens is you have an hour after the iPhone is locked before a timer expires, which then suspends USB support until the phone has been unlocked. Sounds like a nice feature. What is believed is that this was, Apple responding to the Lightning connector-based hacks, which are used now to jailbreak or by law enforcement to get into phones. Immediately after the upgrade, which is to say yesterday, Elcomsoft, which is a company we've spoken of a number of times, they're in this business of messing with iPhones. They confirmed and blogged in detail about a workaround which they had seen previously in the betas and which did survive in the final released result. So no one's really exactly sure what's going on here. This is a little complicated, so I'm going to quote directly from a couple paragraphs of their blog. They said, the most spoken about thing about iOS 11.4.1 is undoubtedly USB restricted mode. Excuse me. This highly controversial feature is apparently built in response to threats created by passcode cracking solutions such as those made by Spinrite and GRC. On unmanaged devices, the new default behavior is to disable on unmanaged devices. The new default behavior is to disable data connectivity of the Lightning connector after 1 hour since the device was last unlocked, or 1 hour since the device has been disconnected from a trusted USB accessory. In addition, users can quickly disable the USB port manually by following the SOS mode routine. That's the click the power or sleep button 5 times rapidly. They write, once USB restricted mode is engaged on a device, no data communications occur over the Lightning port. A connected computer or accessory will not detect a smart device. If anything, an iPhone in USB restricted mode acts as a dumb battery pack. It can be charged, but cannot be identified as a smart device. This, they write, effectively blocks forensic tools from being able to crack passcodes if the iPhone spent more than 1 hour locked. Since law enforcement needs time, more than 1 hour, to transport the seized device to a lab, and then more time to obtain an extraction warrant, USB restricted mode seems well designed to block this scenario. Then they say, or is it? They write, we performed several tests and can now confirm that USB restricted mode is maintained through reboots and persists software restores via recovery mode. So basically they like played with it, trying all kinds of different tricks, seeing if they could regress out of restricted mode. They said, in other words, we have found no obvious way to break USB restricted mode once it is already engaged. However, we discovered a workaround, which happens to work exactly as we suggested back in May. Okay, so they report that if any Lightning device is plugged into a locked iPhone anytime before the 60-minute timer has expired, whether or not the device is known to and trusted by the iPhone, the lock countdown timer will be restarted for another 60 minutes, and this can continue indefinitely. Then I've skipped a bunch of stuff in the blog, but they conclude saying, we've seen rumors about Gray Key being able to defeat protection provided by USB restricted mode. At this time, these are nothing more than rumors. The company's official policy is never issuing comments about pre-release software. With iOS 11.4.1 just released, we'll have to wait to see if the new security measure can be defeated. Either way, since iOS 11.4, the speed of Gray Key and probably its competitors, this is Elcomsoft writing, is limited to slow recovery rates of one passcode guess every 10 minutes. They say while this allows breaking 4-digit passcodes in reasonable time, they say about 2 months worst case scenario, 6-digit passcodes already make little sense to attack unless one has a custom dictionary. And as we know, 6 digits is the new default length for the passcode suggested by iOS. So anyway, an interesting new feature. iOS moves forward, continuing to work to improve the security of their users. And after an hour, nobody sticking something into the Lightning port will be able to access it. And Leo, how does this comport with what Renee explained?
Well, we read the Elcomsoft article, and as you pointed out, the Elcomsoft has some interest in saying, oh, no. But what basically we concluded was if law enforcement wants to carry, Elcomsoft used as an example the Apple camera connection kit, but any USB Lightning port device that's designed to keep the Lightning port alive even after locking, and that's the key, right? Apple's decided, well, if we were to lock it and you're copying photos off on your camera to the iPhone or iPad, and then it locks and suddenly stops working, you'd be peeved.
Right.
So that keeps, even though the device is locked, it keeps the USB channel open. So we said, well, if you're law enforcement, what you do is you carry a USB, the camera connection kit or something similar. You apprehend somebody, you grab his phone, presume that he has unlocked it sometime in the last hour, plug this thing in, and then Renee pointed out you probably also want to put it in a Faraday bag so that it can't be remote wiped, right?
Yep.
Put it in a Faraday bag and then take it back to the home office. You've kept the USB port alive. And
got it.
And nobody denies that that's the case. That is the case. So there's a good reason for it, and maybe Apple will respond, but
Yeah, it sounds like they're aware of it, and it was a trade-off they had to make. But and first of all, again, our listeners should know if you click the power button 5 times rapidly, that immediately locks the USB. It puts it into USB protected mode, so that's protection. Or as you said, if it's been more than an hour, then it's already locked.
Right. Yeah. I think this is a fairly good idea.
Yeah. Oh, I agree. Again, Apple doing the right thing for us.
So if I press my phone, if I press this 5 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then do what? Just leave it?
Yeah, exactly. That is now. Now I don't know if you have to power it down or if that's enough.
Once you powered it down, you're screwed. You. That's the whole thing, right? Now they can't get it at all. And and this is the thing we also talked about. If you've got it's the data on the device is encrypted, even if it's locked, even if they have one of those devices plugged into it, they're going to pull off encrypted data, not unencrypted data once the phone's locked. Is that right?
Correct. Well, what I thought was interesting was that it can, if they can get to a live Lightning port, these crackers can do an automated guess once every 10 minutes without triggering the phones you've guessed too many times timer. So what they're doing is they're just like sticking the phone on this cracking device and waiting maybe up to 2 months if the user has a 4-digit passcode, or hoping they get lucky if it's longer than that.
Longer. And of course,
Yeah.
the best solution, which is something I do, Andy does, a lot of people do, is don't use a passcode at all. Use a long, I have an 18 or 19 character word. It's a pain in the butt to enter it. But then I don't have to worry at all because no brute force is going to work against that.
No one going to get, because so what this does is it dramatically restricts the rate at which brute force guessing can happen.
Right.
Just another quickie, another reminder. I was also sort of thought it was interesting. As we all know by now, ever since Peter Norton made a name for himself with his famous undelete utility, that was the one thing Peter came out with that put him on the map.
And it was a pretty simple thing too.
Oh my God, Leo!
He wrote it in Pascal.
Yeah, and it turns out that the first character of the file name was turned into an E5, a hex E5.
Right.
It just, a little bit of trivia that I remember.
It looks like an upside down E.
Yeah.
If you look at it as an ASCII code.
Yep. And so what he realized was, and the FAT was the entries in the file allocation table were also zeroed to free up the space.
Right.
But of course, as we know, the data itself was not proactively removed from the hard drive. And so if you were lucky, you could restore the directory entry, which was left there intact, pointing to the first cluster of the file. And often the file was a contiguous run of clusters. The directory entry also showed how long the file was. That told Peter's unerase how many clusters it needed, and so it was able to judge whether there was a contiguous run of clusters that long. In which case, chances were you had the file back, and so that made Peter famous, and so forth. Anyway, as we know, deleting files doesn't delete them. Neither does formatting them. Formatting is a little more is a stronger process. It wipes out the front of the drive, the whole directory, the file the file allocation table gets zeroed and so forth. But the data again is still out there on the physical drive surface. Well, this is of course the same with memory cards, which use the same sort of file system. So Bleeping Computer had just carried an interesting little piece from researchers at the University of Hertfordshire in the UK. They purchased a bunch of random memory cards from eBay, from some auctions, from secondhand shops, and other sources over a 4-month period. They discovered, that shouldn't come as a surprise to us, that 2/3 of memory cards contained readily recoverable data. They wrote in their report that the memory cards they recovered were previously used in smartphones, tablets, cameras, satellite navigation systems, and even drones. To perform the recovery, they first imaged the storage to create a bit-by-bit copy, then just used freely available software to see whether they could recover any data from the card. The team recovered, they wrote, a great deal of data from the memory cards, intimate photos, selfies, passport copies, contact lists, navigation files, pornography,
I'm gonna have
resumes,
to erase my cards better.
browsing history, identification numbers, and personal documents.
Of course, you put all that stuff on USB cards.
Yes. And what you want to do is never, ever, ever throw them away.
Is there any other way to fix that?
I'll talk about that in a second.
Okay.
36 were not wiped at all, so neither the original owner nor the seller took any steps to remove the data.
Bothered.
Yeah. 29 appeared to have been formatted, but the data was still there, so it was recoverable with minimal effort. 2 cards had data deleted, but was still easily recoverable. 25 appeared to have been wiped using a data erasing tool that overwrote the storage area, So from those cards, nothing could be recovered. 4 were dead completely and could not be accessed. They were just broken. And then 4 had no data present, but the team was unable to determine the reason. So there are, and it is worth using, data wiping tools. I've mentioned previously on this podcast that I have an arc of my future development. As we all know, I'll be working on Spinrite 6.1 and 0.2, which will dramatically speed up Spinrite. That's like the main feature is speed by talking directly to the hardware. First, for the motherboard-based connected controllers, SATA, the AHCI, SATA, and IDE, if anyone has an older motherboard, basically circumventing the BIOS. Then I'm going to do the same thing for the serial connected devices to give us good performance on attached USB. And, of course, that also means thumb drives and smart cards. So what I'm going to do before I start on 7 is to release another product called Beyond Recall. And as its name suggests, whereas Spinrite is all about recovering data, Beyond Recall will be about absolutely and positively and quickly, because what it's going to do is it's going to use the technology I develop for the 6.x series. I will reuse that low-level direct to the hardware technology to make Beyond Recall feasibly fast. So, for example, you'll be able to wipe a multi-terabyte drive in a few hours, whereas it just prohibitively, it's like incredibly painfully difficult to do that in a reasonable time otherwise.
Or
and of course,
you could do what Mr. Robot did. Throw them in the microwave.
Yes.
Would that work?
If you have a throwaway microwave, because it hurts the microwave.
It's not good.
It
for
creates
the microwave.
Sparks and all kinds of shit.
Yeah.
I would drill holes in them. You really want to physically destroy them until I have Beyond Recall, and maybe even before or after. But anyway, so I think there's an increasing need to securely wipe these things, and there's also sort of lots of tricks I'll get up to, because by talking to their controllers, you can deal with things like regions which have been swapped out and are no longer accessible to the front door. You need to get in the back door in order to deal with regions which have been taken out because of wear. The whole wear leveling thing. So that's
what we really need, because there's always that stray stuff lying around because of wear leveling.
Yep.
Yeah.
And lastly, just to close the loop on the USB fans, which were handed out at the Trump-Kim summit, many security researchers were made very uncomfortable by this. Yeah. Everybody got them, and two researchers were able to obtain them from journalists who were present.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Was there anything going on there?
No.
Oh.
They found nothing other than fan motors hooked directly to the USB's 5-volt power and ground lines. The two data lines had no connections to them, so nothing smart was there that might get up to some mischief. However, the security researchers noted that, first of all, many smart of these noted that many fans were distributed, and a few smart fans might still have been used in targeted attacks. Yeah. That is, given to specific individuals who would then maybe take some take some comfort from knowing that security researchers opened other people's fans and found nothing in them. So, the overall takeaway, not only from this, but in general, is do not use untrusted USB without a USB condom. It is always too dangerous.
Which, thanks to you, I always have with me.
Yep.
Steve sent me 2 condoms.
Yep. Leo, these are reusable condoms because, you should really never reuse
anything else. Yeah.
The other kind. Anyone traveling, especially anyone who might be targeted, should always use protection. Or better yet, simply abstain while on the road.
Yes.
However, if you can't,
sometimes you have to charge, right?
It's worth having a condom.
Yeah. I'm sure the Secret Service vetted, I would hope, vetted these things.
As I understand it, I mean, I don't know how they did. You could put remember there were those USB killing devices we talked about a while ago that would like zap a USB. It was a gadget that you would hook to your computer and it would charge up and then release a kilovolt burst into the USB port.
That'd be handy.
So one thing you could do would be to just blast the crap out of the data lines, which would fry anything that was sniffing the data lines, but still leave the power lines alone.
This is this is the PortaPower.
That's the one.
PortaPower. Data Block Plus Smart Charge that you just use as a little USB.
Yeah. And just all it is the 5 volt and ground lines go through, and the data lines are disconnected.
Yep. And you're safe. No problem.
So I got an interesting note from Eric. Looks like Thera. Oh boy, I didn't pronounce his name ahead of time. I didn't practice. Theriault, Theriault. Eric Theriault. I hope I didn't mangle.
It's French.
So it's pronounced
Theriault, I would guess.
Okay, I'm going to give up.
Yeah, Theriault.
Anyway, he's in Quebec.
Theriault.
Is that Quebec or
Quebec?
I don't know what I'm doing. Anyway, I do know what I'm doing about Spinrite. So he said his subject was Spinrite and RAID 6. How to please help. And he said hi to everybody. He said hi, Steve, Leo, Sue, Greg, and Elaine. So he missed some of your staff, Leo, but he got all of mine.
Close enough. Yeah.
He says I have a home server set up on a RAID 6, 5 disks of 2 terabyte each. I assume he means. This computer is always on, and multiple services depend on it. I can easily shut down and reboot if it's for a short period, but I would prefer not longer than 30 to 60 minutes. Worst case would be to shut down during the night. My question, how, if there's a way, can I do Spinrite maintenance on all 5 disks without having to shut down the computer for a week? I could do a hot unplug 1 disk at a time and Spinrite it on another computer. But if my understanding is right, this would be useless. Well, no, but okay. We'll see where he goes with this. Because it would then make the data on that disk irrelevant. And when I would reconnect the drive, the software RAID would have to rebuild all the data on the reinserted drive because the data in the still active 4 disks would, of course, have changed. Okay, yes, he's right about that. Please share, as usual, any good practice for this kind of configuration on or off the podcast. Up to you. Well, thanks, Eric. He says, FYI, this is a software RAID on a Linux using MDADM, which I'm not familiar with, but sounds like a nice thing. He says, oh, by the way, I got in the show first back in July 2017, so just exactly a year ago. He says, and after 3 months, decided to go back from the beginning. I'm now up to the 217th episode and, of course, up to date since July last year. So he's going back and catching up. So yay, Eric, thanks. He says, keep going with that amazing podcast. I learn so much every week. Thank you so much. Okay, so I thought about his problem, and the best I can suggest, it would be to take advantage of 6.1's speed when it's available. It assuming they're 5 disks of 2 terabytes each, rather than a total RAID 6 of 2 terabytes, which would make all the drives maybe half a terabyte. Before I suspended the work on 6.1 in order to work on Squirrel, I had benchmarked the preliminary driver that I wrote for AHCI controllers at half a terabyte per hour, which would mean that Spinrite could do a 2 terabyte drive in 4 hours, making it at least feasible to do overnight. So what Eric could do would be to down his system, Spinrite one, and like presumably if it's a Linux RAID, it's on a machine, so on a PC, so we wouldn't have to remove any drives, just run Spinrite on one of those drives. And actually, we talked about the command line option. You could use a script to run it successively on one drive, then a second drive, which would be 2 drives overnight in 8 hours, then bring it back up. And so you could, in this scenario, you could do the whole 5-disk RAID in 3 nights in a way that would not break the RAID, because Spinrite never changes the data on any of the drives it works on. So the RAID wouldn't break, and in 3 nights, you'd have Spinrite did all of the drives. And nothing I will ever be able to do will be able to improve on half a terabyte per hour. That is absolutely, I pulled every trick in the book. I'm even though I'm in DOS, I'm using a fancy real mode that gives access to extended memory from real mode. So I'm allocating a 64 meg buffer, which is the largest transfer that any drives can do in a single burst. And all drives are optimized for continuous streaming single burst transfer. So no revs are missed. It's like catching every single revolution. So we're limited by literally the platter speed. Now, it might be that you have a higher platter speed on the drive, more sectors per, so that would increase its throughput. But basically, when we get to 6.1, it will be running the drives at absolutely their maximum capacity, with like never missing a revolution in a 64 megabyte transfer of 128,000 sectors or something. Wow. Anyway, whatever it is, that's my target for 6.1. So, and as I mentioned before, Beyond Recall will be employing the same technology to scrub disks. I asked when I was working on 6.1, I had suggested to the gang in the news group where we work on this stuff that I add a Beyond Recall feature to Spinrite. And they universally said, no. Do not confuse
That's probably
Spinrite.
a good idea.
Do not confuse Spinrite that recovers data with something that is called Beyond Recall that absolutely destroys the ability to recover. So it's like, okay, fine. That'll be a separate, inexpensive product. And I think it'll be popular. So we'll see.
There is Derek's Bootin' Nuke, but that doesn't know about SSDs, right? That's part of the problem.
D-band. Yes, exactly. Yeah. So it'll be. I will have something as soon as I can.
Nice. Until there's D-band. Well, until there's secure. What is it called? Secure Erase. Total
Beyond Recall.
Beyond Recall. I love that name.
Isn't that great? Yeah.
Until there's Beyond Recall, there's D-band. But once Beyond Recall comes out, Derek, you're going to have to find a new line of work. So, no, he doesn't charge for it, so it's not really a line of work. Our show today brought to you by our friends at Rocket Mortgage. Quicken Loans, the lending leader, has created Rocket Mortgage to make it fast and easy for you to get a loan. But they also want to improve the home shopping experience. See, one of the problems, of course, it's hard to find a new house. It's not something you do overnight. They solved the loan approval process by making it entirely online, which is awesome, and doing it fast. But the problem is, sure, you can get the loan, but what if you haven't found the house yet? And, if you're looking for a house, sometimes that can take months. And interest rates, meanwhile, are ratcheting up the whole time. What are you going to do about that? They are doing something about that. No more anxiety. They call it the power buying process. Here's how it works. Quicken Loans, as always, verifies your income, assets, and credit in less than 24 hours to give you a verified approval, which, by the way, makes you as good as a cash buyer. The seller knows you're good for it, basically. You say, hey, I've got verified approval. The loan is guaranteed up to this amount. But the problem is, what do you do about the interest rate? That's when once you're verified, you want to take advantage of the all-new exclusive Rate Shield approval. They lock your rate up for 90 days while you shop. You got 3 months. And if the rates go up, no problem. Your rate stays the same. You're guaranteed it. This is another nice thing. It's a ratchet. If it goes down, well, your rate goes down. So it can't go up, but it can go down. Either way, you win. It's the kind of thinking you'd expect from America's largest and best mortgage lender. It's Quicken Loans and Rocket Mortgage. Go to rocketmortgage.com/security now. You get yourself all hooked up with the power buying process and Rate Shield approval. Rate Shield approval is valid on only some 30-year purchase transactions. Additional conditions or exclusions could apply based on Quicken Loans data in comparison to public data records. Equal housing lender, licensed in all 50 states, NMLS consumeraccess.org number 3030. rocketmortgage.com/security now, and we thank Rocket Mortgage and Quicken Loans for their support. And now I give you, once again, Steve Gibson.
Okay, so STARTTLS. Boy, I really do want to do an extra T in there, Leo. Every time I see it, STARTTLS. No, I guess it's because of TTL, time to live, right? And so I'm used to thinking about that instead of TLS. So anyway, STARTTLS Everywhere is the name that the EFF, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, gave to their newest initiative. Once upon a time, just like the web and HTTP, email was only plain text. Web pages went to and from in plain text, and so did our mail. With the web, however, we have a direct point-to-point real-time link between our web browser and the remote server that we're visiting. So this point-to-point link made it a relatively simple thing to allow the remote web server to assert its identity and for the user's web browser client to verify that identity and to complain to us in real time, with warnings and stuff if something didn't look right somewhere. But email has always been different. For one thing, it's designed to be non-real time and asynchronous. It's very much like the way packets route around the internet that we've talked about. Email is delivered as a best effort store and forward system where autonomous SMTP, that's Simple Mail Transfer Protocol servers, receive and forward email toward its destination. And in that sense, store and forward is a bit like the internet router's receive and route function, where the exact path to be taken may not be known. And so the various components along the way just sort of send the mail toward this destination. So to do that in the beginning, we had, as we know, two elder email protocols still in use today, although one has sort of faded a bit: POP, the Post Office Protocol, and SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. POP it is and was used by mail clients to receive mail from servers from their so-called post office. The clients would connect to their email server over port 110 and ask for any email that had arrived since their last check-in. Typically, they'd receive, then delete the email from the server so that the email took its final hop to them and then had arrived at its destination. And no encryption, just plain text. And we were all happy. Then later, Imap came along, the Internet Message Access Protocol, which, and the way it's different is sort of hinted at by its name. It operates over port 143, and it allowed clients to retain their email on the server and instead manage it remotely through their client, which became more of a viewer of the email on the server. And again, port 143, no encryption anywhere, no encryption in sight. And then that finally the SMTP, the Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, that's the incoming mail service and the protocol, which is offered by servers listening for connections on port 25. So whereas both ports 110 for POP and 143 for IMAP were getting mail from servers, port 25 is sending mail to servers, whether it's the client sending it to their own SMTP server for it to then in turn send to the destination, or for one SMTP server to send it to the next SMTP server. And again, no encryption from the beginning. And so even today, we have email hopping around all over the place, and end-to-end encryption is far from guaranteed. Remember that, you know, you may have a secure connection to your SMTP server, but, and it's increasingly the case that the SMTP server you have sent your mail to directly connects to the SMTP server who your recipient uses. And so if that link is secure, you're probably okay. But the protocol doesn't guarantee that. It could be multiple hops. And in that case, the intermediate SMTP server is like a man in the middle. Even if there are secure connections on both sides of it, it's decrypted. That email is decrypted while it has it. So unless you, and even when everything is working with email encryption, that will still be true. So it's only by the user taking the initiative to use PGP or SMIME or to pre-encrypt a blob and then send it that they can actually get end-to-end encryption, even once everything is working with email encryption. It still isn't true end-to-end. So how do we fix where we are? Well, unfortunately, it wasn't a straight line. Just as the first web browsers originally connected, as I mentioned before, over port 80 without any authentication and encryption, what the architects of the internet did was they said, okay, we're going to give web servers a new port, a different port, in this case 443, which will require encryption. That is, anybody connecting to port 443 is still connecting to the web server, but has to negotiate an SSL originally and now a TLS protocol connection, meaning that the server will assume that and will send a certificate to assert its identity. The client will obtain it, make sure that it's the server it wants to talk to, they negotiate, and off they go. But all of that as a consequence of connecting on this different dedicated port. So the same thing was done for email, but unfortunately, it didn't happen first. It sort of happened after it's like not really clear. I've attempted to sort of like disentangle the RFCs, but it's a mess of one obsoleting the other, and I don't know. Can't really explain how we got into the mess we're in today, because it seems unlike the orderly process we're used to on the internet. But what happened is there exists today similar dedicated encryption-only ports for these three protocols, for POP, Imap, and SMTP. For POP, which used to be and still is unencrypted by default, there is POP over port 995. And any client connecting to port 995 of an email server is expected to bring up a TLS connection, just like a web browser connecting to a web server on port 443. Certificate is exchanged, certificate is verified, authenticated, encryption comes up, and we're off and running. Imap's original port 443 similarly has a twin, in this case with implicit encryption. That's port 993. And similarly, port 25, that is plain text SMTP, now has an encrypted version 465. Okay, so we had new ports that were encrypted. Unfortunately, somewhere along the way, before this right way of doing it happened, STARTTLS was mixed in. But it's not quite that simple either. The internet wizards disliked the idea that port 25 and the encrypted version 465 was being used for both email forwarding between SMTP servers, also known as MTAs, message transfer agents. But that same port was being used to receive email submissions from email clients. So they further complicated things by attempting to split the submission and the forwarding roles by defining another SMTP port 567 for email clients to use. So this was defined for some reason as a plain text port which could be upgraded by the use of STARTTLS, which we'll get to in a second. And then, believe it or not, after adding this new SMTP alternative connection port for clients, just this year, earlier in 2018, the decision was made to discourage the use of port 567 for future email client submission in favor of returning to using SMTP over TLS 465 and sharing that single email submission port between clients and servers. So it's a mess. Okay, so these secure ports are now widely adopted, but not universally adopted. They use our well-known and well-proven existing CA-issued server domain certificates to work with these new ports, just as they work so well with HTTPS. The problem is that an alternative sort of half-baked solution was also added to the RFCs, which allows a negotiation between non-secured connections to elevate itself. And so what we have today kind of works, but not very well. As its name suggests, STARTTLS provides a means for, as I said, an insecure plain text connection to start using TLS. When a client connects, and this is over the non-implicit TLS ports, that is not 995, 993, and 465, but over the old port, the old school, the original 110, 143, and 25, when a client connects, the server will respond with a hello message, which includes the notification that it supports STARTTLS if it does. In which case, if the client also supports STARTTLS, it will accept that offer essentially from the server to switch over to TLS, and they will negotiate a TLS connection and switch the existing connection over a non-secure port to be secure. Sounds great, right? Except, and again, this was like, there was a point in time where this must have made sense, where the idea was to provide an upgrade path on existing ports at the protocol level that wouldn't break old stuff, that wouldn't require new ports to be assigned, that would like sort of be forward compatible. But boy, in retrospect, it's a mess. Yet, it's in the world. We have it. And so we're sort of stuck with it. Okay, so it has STARTTLS itself currently sits with about just shy of 90%, about 89% presence currently, as is shown by Google's email transparency report, which is not bad considering that it was at 39% just 5 years ago. So, you know, with the move towards security and a heightened concern for encryption, new servers coming online look like, well, they're probably just, you know, they default to supporting it, because why not? You've got a certificate for the server, let the email server use it, and you've got TLS. Except big problems. Okay, so now paraphrasing from the EFF, because they summarize this nicely, they said, although many mail servers enable STARTTLS, get this, most still do not validate the certificates. Without certificate validation, as we know, an active attacker on the network can read and modify emails sent through supposedly secure connections. Since it's not common practice to validate certificates, there's often little incentive to present valid certificates in the first place, right? Certificates are a pain, which is why a lot of sites, a lot of websites just didn't bother. And you could argue that email needs them even less than web servers do, where you actually do have sensitive data passing back and forth on a web server's pages. Yeah, email has lots of sensitive data too, but somehow it's sort of out of sight. Okay, but get this. Servers are not validating the certificates. So what are they doing? They are using self-signed certificates that no one trusts. The recipient is not going to trust a self-signed certificate, but it's valid. So, you know, I mean, it is a certificate. So so I guess the way to think of this is you would have opportunistic encryption. That is, the server is offering a certificate that does allow the TLS handshake to happen. So even though the authentication is not present, at least you get protection from a passive observer. You get encryption, so somebody sniffing the line won't see anything. Okay. The EFF writes, on the web, when browsers encounter certificate errors, these errors can be and are immediately communicated to the end user, as I mentioned before, who can then decide whether to continue to the insecure site or not, or that is to say, the non-secured site. With email, they write, this is not an option. Since an email user's client, like Thunderbird or Gmail app on a user's phone, runs separately from the machine responsible for actually sending the mail. That is because it's a SMT server to SMTP server connection. Since breakage they write, means the email simply won't send. The email ecosystem is naturally more risk averse than the browser ecosystem when it comes to breakages. As a result, the EFF writes, the ecosystem is stuck with a sort of chicken and egg problem. No one validates certificates because the other party often doesn't have a valid one. And, as they write, the long tail of mail servers continue to use invalid certificates because no one is validating them anyway. So why bother? And there's more. Let's imagine, okay, they write a future where everyone did have STARTTLS enabled and did have a valid certificate. So now it becomes safe for everyone to start to validate certificates and insist upon validation. What could go wrong? Well, we still have the classic security downgrade attack. Both communicating mail servers support STARTTLS, and they both have valid certificates. I mean, everybody's valid, and certificates are being checked, right? Unfortunately, the initially insecure connection is opportunistically upgraded to a secure one. So, as we know, a man in the middle could intercept the traffic and remove the declaration of STARTTLS support from the connection receiving server, who is the first one to say, hey, I support TLS. If you do, let's go. So as a consequence, the client believes the server it's connecting to, lamely, doesn't support TLS, and so it shrugs and says, okay, fine, we'll use non-encrypted connection. And so a classic security downgrade attack. It turns out that this is not just theoretical. The EFF writes that U.S. ISPs and those abroad have been caught doing exactly this. And in 2014, 4 years ago, several researchers found that encryption on outbound email from several countries was being regularly stripped. So again, unfortunately, if you can, that's what happens. Now, there's Dane. Dane, we've talked about. Everyone knows I am super excited about the idea of DNS-based authentication of named entities. That's the idea of using DNS as a global caching, sort of universal reference system, where this, for example, could be used to solve the problem completely. If we had consistent and full Dane deployment, that would offer a scalable solution for mail servers, which could clarify the certificate validation rules and prevent downgrade attacks simply by publishing in their DNS that what it is they support for incoming email connections. In that case, the connecting server would have pulled DNS anyway in order to get the IP address it needs to connect to. So in the process, it could ask for the Dane record for email authentication, find out, oh, look, this server does support STARTTLS, so we're good to go. In that case, if the server appeared to say, I don't support it, then the connecting server would say, whoops, something's wrong here. We're not going to send email over an insecure connection that could be secured. The bad news is Dane relies upon DNSSEC, and DNSSEC deployment has been stagnant for about the past 5 years and is stuck somewhere between 10 and 15% globally. So that's not going to come to our rescue anytime soon. Okay, so fresh off their success with Let's Encrypt, the EFF has set itself 3 worthy goals to improve this current sad state of affairs. Okay, first, They want to improve STARTTLS adoption. They want to make it easy to deploy STARTTLS with valid certificates, not self-signed certificates, on mail servers. So they are developing CertBot, as they call them, certificate bots, CertBot plugins for popular mail server software, starting with Postfix, which is currently in beta. So the idea would be that this would allow Postfix, much like Let's Encrypt allows a web server to ask for a valid, trusted certificate from the Let's Encrypt CA. This CertBot would allow web servers similarly to obtain a no-cost mail certificate like automatically. So certificates no longer need to be self-signed. They can be valid. They can be free. So then the EFF says that this first work for Postfix will be followed up by support for the Dovecot and SendMail servers, and they are open to and welcome contributions of installer plugins for other email servers. Okay, so improve the adoption, make it easy for servers to have valid certificates and not cost them anything. Second, prevent STARTTLS downgrade attacks. They say that in order to detect attacks, the EFF, will be hosting a web server policy list of mail servers known to support STARTTLS. This list will act as a preload list of mail server security policies. The list already includes a number of big player email domains, of course, all the usual suspects, Gmail, Yahoo, Outlook, and so forth, and they're actively seeking more. Use of the list will require mail servers to become list aware, of course, but without this, STARTTLS will always be susceptible to downgrade attack. You know, I have to say my feeling is it would be better just to switch over to the TLS implicit ports and just give up on STARTTLS, but I certainly respect what the EFF is doing with this effort. And finally, their last part of this initiative is lowering the barriers to entry for running a dedicated mail server. And I was a little puzzled by this one. They write, when they're explaining this, email was designed as a federated and decentralized communication protocol. Since then, the ecosystem has centralized dramatically, and it has become exponentially more difficult to run your own mail server. Okay, I don't know why that's the case. You know, I run my own at GRC, and it's not hard at all. Anyway, they say the complexity of running an email service is compounded by the anti-spam arms race that small mail operators are thrust into. Okay, again, not a problem here. Anyway, at the very least, we'd like to lower the barriers to entry for running a functional, secure mail server. Okay, yay for that. I'm all for it. I just don't know exactly what it is they're talking about. They say beyond developing and testing CertBot plugins for popular MTAs, we're still brainstorming ideas for the decentralization of the email ecosystem. So I guess they don't know yet either, but they have a goal. If you work on easy-to-deploy MTA software, they say, let's get in touch. So then finally they finish with a call to arms. They said, you can help too. They write, all of our software packages are currently in a developer beta state, and our team is stretched thin working on all these projects. You can help make the email ecosystem more secure by preloading your email domain on our policy list, contributing to or reporting feature requests to STARTTLS Everywhere, helping implement and promote security features like DANE validation in MTA software, and contributing certificate installer plugins to MTAs for MTAs to CertBot. So anyway, that's STARTTLS Everywhere. Certainly, it would be good to have it. And there's no reason not to. maybe as a fallback for, if nothing else, it provides opportunistic encryption, which is probably supported by both endpoints over the existing ports for systems that are really old and creaky and know about STARTTLS, but don't, for whatever reason, want to connect to the new TLS ports, which are available across the board for these protocols. Anyway, tip of the hat to the EFF. I'm glad, they always have our backs, and I'm glad for the work they're doing. And that's the story on securing email.
What mail server do you use? If it's so
I
easy?
use HMail server on Windows, which is very nice. It's free, lots of features. My very, very, very favorite one is an anti-blacklisting feature. Any time with zero tolerance, a server connects to mine and asks for a non-existent account, they are blacklisted.
Nice.
And because what the servers do is they guess. They just start at Abby and go down to Zeke.
Right.
And so, as you know, Leo, I routinely obsolete my email addresses. And so what that does is that has any spammers are using an obsolete address from previous years, bang, they are blacklisted.
Nice.
So as a consequence, we get no spam. It really is a nice system.
You get a lot less mail, too, because nobody knows your address. But that's another matter entirely.
Yeah, and that works for me.
You don't really care.
That works for me.
I would like to do the same thing. hmailserver.com.
It's great.
Yeah. I got to find something that simple for Linux. That would be nice. To run my own server would be nice.
Yeah.
And you don't need a lot of bandwidth to do that because
email is typically yeah.
Can you reject HTML mail with it? You do, don't you?
Oh yeah, you can do anything you want
to. You do that, as a matter of fact. Yeah. I think that's smart. My friends, we've come to the concluding portion of this show in which I remind you that you can watch us do it live every Tuesday, 1:30 Pacific, 4:30 Eastern, 20:30 UTC. At live.twit.tv or twit.tv/live. You choose. They're different players. Some people prefer one. Some people prefer the other. In either case, though, you'll get access to a variety of different hosts. We use YouTube and Twitch, Ustream, and Mixer. There's also audio streaming that we do ourselves. Or no, maybe we use Spreaker. I think we use Spreaker and another service to do that now. In any event, watch or listen live if you can. If you're going to do that, be in the chat room, irc.twit.tv. You can join the back channel. You can also be in studio. We had two great studio audience members who have been here all day. They're very patient. Email tickets at twit.tv if you're going to be in the Petaluma area, Petaluma, Northern California area. And come on by. We'd love to have you. If you can't do any of those, you can always get a copy of the show from Steve's server, grc.com. That's he's got audio and really nice transcripts so you can read along. And while you're there, check out Spinrite, the world's best hard drive maintenance and recovery utility. Free upgrades, right? If you buy Spinrite now, you're good through 7.
Yes,
Is that
sir.
Right?
Yes, sir.
Don't want to put any words in your mouth. Okay.
Well, wait. Through the 6
through
series.
6. 7 will be an upgrade. Okay.
So you get all of the speed and compatibility improvements that are planned for Spinrite for the Point X releases.
Yeah.
And actually, 7 is going to blow the doors off of data recovery, but we'll save that discussion.
I like
for another
that.
Time. Yep, it's going to do everything that everybody wants in data recovery.
That would be very nice. Well, we'll find out more about that as time goes by. There's also stuff there that's free, that's fun, that's useful, that's informative. It's a great site. It's one of those sites that you start and you continue to browse and browse and browse. There's always something new and interesting there. grc.com. You can reach Steve on Twitter. That's probably the easiest way to message him or tweet him. GRC is his company, Gibson Research Corporation. His Twitter handle is his initials, SG plus GRC, so SGGRC. That's the easiest way to reach him, but you can also go to grc.com/feedback. We have audio and video. God knows why you'd want to watch, but you can. you watch every once in a while, then you can get an idea of what Steve's mustache looks like today and things like that.
That's right.
Yeah.
The important things.
The important stuff. That's at twit.tv/SN. And, of course, if you have a favorite podcast application, and they're all over the place, use that and just look for Security Now, subscribe, and that way you don't even think about it. It'll just be there every Tuesday evening when you need it. Steve, thanks. Have a great week.
Thank you, my friend. Talk to you next week. Bye.
Security.